Eleanor Roosevelt had this great quote. She said that poor minds talk about other people, average minds talk about events, but great minds, they talk about ideas. Yeah, of course I believe in LGBT rights. Of course I believe in women's rights. Of course I believe in minority rights. You know why? Because they're all individual rights. We all have rights as individuals. General Smedley Butler, one of the most decorated American soldiers in all of history, wrote an entire book called War is a Racket. The value of the dollar has gone down by over 96% in the last 100 years. The Second Amendment is not there so that we can go outside and hunt rabbits. It's there to keep us free. And actually, I would argue that if anyone needs the Second Amendment, it's minorities. Historically, unarmed minorities fare the worst in all of history. Those are the genocides we all hear about. Look, violence is wrong, all right? Whether it's cops or whether it's riots, it's unacceptable in a civilized society. You know what really gets me is everyone knows that the largest polluter on Earth is the U.S. government. All right. So how are they the ones going to solve the problem? You know what's insane is we have the largest prison population in the entire world, and over half of them are for non-violent crimes. Welcome to the Take On Everything podcast.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Take On Everything podcast. As always, I'm your host, James Cook. Happy to have you back. And today, like I've been alluding to, we're going to go and do a historical episode to learn about an episode in history that I think is important to know about. I think almost every historical instance is important to know about because it kind of helps direct our future and helps us understand a little bit about culture in the past and how maybe some major events impacted how we reacted. I'm talking from the perspective of the United States and as an American citizen, and whether those things were good or bad and how we got into some weird situations. So everybody knows in World War II, right? Nazi Germany was, the story was they're taking over the world, they're killing everybody. They want to take over Europe and all this. The other piece of that is the concentration camps. So the concentration camps were, they were started in Germany in 1933. It was part of the nationalist rebirth of the German people. So Hitler kind of he came to power kind of preaching this nationalist kind of self-reliant, making of a new German man kind of idea. And this kind of arose out of a lot of the unfair resolution to World War I. So World War I was a typical war between a lot of European powers, and it went from 1915. And they were doing their thing. And if you look at European history, there's a war every couple of years. If somebody was at war, somebody was fighting. They would fight. Both sides would usually it wasn't a total victory. It was like they'd get tired of it and they'd move on and they'd sign a treaty and do something else, which is kind of some way to establish, hey, we're no pushovers. But a lot of times it just ended, as amicably as a war could end. It was kind of more of a sport for royalty and kind of just a way to flex on your neighbors and to get some war cred and that kind of thing. Usually it didn't really turn into a world war. It really didn't turn into a world war for the most part. Instead of a series of successive exacerbations. And it really culminated in the United States wanting to join the war in 1917. Woodrow Wilson was a big proponent of becoming this international influence. So he saw this opportunity as a way to kind of establish the United States as a world power and a dominant power. So they jumped right in on the side of the UK, defeated the other side, and then the Treaty of Versailles happened, and it really was one of the first examples of a declaration of like total defeat. Like they made Germany and their Austro-Hungarian Empire and the other the Axis on that side kind of admit full defeat, take full blame. And with that came a significant monetary cost. So in the past, it made sense. Like, a lot of the treaties previously for other European wars, the loser, even though they generally didn't lose too much land or anything, would pay a certain amount for the inconvenience of fighting the war. It was never anything crazy. But World War One marked a dramatic shift in that the United States really, actually, most of the powers that had fought on the side of the United States were going to do the traditional thing. They weren't going to force Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire to pay too much. It was kind of going to just be like, a little slap on the wrist. It's like, hey, we won, admit it. We're going to take, a year's worth of this or whatever. But the United States really wanted to stick it to him. Woodrow Wilson was a big proponent of, he genuinely wanted to end war. And, you saw the predecessor to the United Nations appear after this. In an attempt to kind of quell a lot of the international disputes. He wanted to make sure that nobody wanted to do this again, so they stuck it to Germany. There was a blockade at the end of the war. World War One, that the United States was involved in. It ended up kind of really just destroying the German economy and a lot of the German people. It took like the German pride, and then the Treaty of Versailles kind of did an extended and really unprecedented level of reparations to the other countries that had won the war. And Germany ended up paying for these, for the several decades after World War One, and it really demolished their economy and their national pride. I'm not on the side of Germany. I'm just saying there's a reason why they were so kind of in such bad shape, to the point where somebody like Hitler could rise to power. Because Hitler was an extreme nationalist, and before Germany was generally, kind of an international leader. They dealt with a lot of countries, they traded with a lot of countries, and they were a recognized player. And then after World War One and that treaty kind of just absolutely demolished everything that they had, and a lot of their land got divvied up, especially with the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was given away to a lot of the Allies and redistricted, and the Ukraine, the breadbasket of Europe, was kind of taken away. They didn't have access to the food. Well, they did, but the blockade kept them from getting food in, so a lot of the people in Germany starved to death. And so that was Hitler rose to power by saying, hey, we're going to retake this national pride. We're going to take Ukraine so that they can't starve us again. We're going to stop paying all of these reparations back to these other countries that were unfairly put on us. So, again, not taking anybody's side, but you can sort of see why it was popular for Hitler to come to power in that time. It's because Germany was decimated. They wanted somebody to make them feel better about themselves and make them not feel like such losers. And also, their economy was in shambles because everything that they made went to France and the UK and the United States. And so Hitler comes to power. He's like, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to be self-sufficient. We're going to take over Ukraine. We're going to have access to food all the time. They're not going to do this again to us. Little did the German people know he was a crazy person. So after they elected him, there was the anti-Semitism that he brought as well, that blamed a lot of the Jewish people for the exit of capital from Germany, along with all of this war debt and all these other financial implications. It was easy to find somebody to blame to kind of unify Germany, so they blamed the Jews. So in 1933, they began the plan to relocate. Originally, it was a plan to relocate the Jews. And that happened in 1933. They sent them to transition camps, is what they were originally called, and always be very, very wary of how the government describes some of the things that they do. Oh, this is just a transition camp. So it actually, for the most part, the transition camps functioned as was originally intended. Again, it's not okay to transplant people from their homes and just move them out of the country. However, that is what happened from 1933 to 1939, until a lot of the war started and the countries closed their borders and they stopped taking the Jewish refugees. Then it really started to build up in the concentration camps. And at this point, Germany was starting to lose the war. They had some logistics issues, and so again, because Hitler was a crazy person and he was all hyped up on amphetamines and testosterone and all kinds of crazy drugs, you have a crazy dictator leading this faltering nation who's having economic problems and has a huge it was 11 million person population in their concentration camps across the country. They just started killing them. And I it's curious to wonder what would have happened if there wasn't a world war, and or if Germany hadn't been losing. Would all of those people be dead? I think it was a large contributor was the fact that they were losing and that the World War happened. World War II happened. Again, they started it, but if it hadn't escalated to being a world war, and if they hadn't started losing and having economic problems, I wonder if they would have been able to, the Jews would have been able to survive and leave the country, because it was a combination of the closed borders, the restricted access to food, and all these other things that war brings that kind of facilitated Hitler's argument to kill everybody in these internment camps. And so it was just a sick series of events that ended in this horrible, horrible massacre genocide in Germany. So we all know about this, and we all know how horrible that episode in history was. What we don't really talk about, and I didn't know for a very long time because it's generally not taught in school, is in 1942, right about the same time that the Germans began to exterminate the Jewish people that they had in the concentration camps. The United States, Pearl Harbor happened December 7th, 1941. Immediately, the U.S. government began rounding up Japanese citizens, well, not Japanese citizens, Japanese American citizens, so they're American citizens but of Japanese descent, and began interrogating them. Shortly after that, in February of 1942, President Franklin Roosevelt issued the Executive Order 9066, which was kind of floated as an idea to prevent spying and espionage in the United States. But what it did was it turned the entire western coast of the United States into a militarized zone under martial law to a certain extent. That executive order led to the Japanese Americans. I think it was about 117,000 Japanese Americans were put into internment camps, right? So these internment camps were located throughout the country, and so they tried to get Japanese. It was under, they assumed, Japanese people are on the Japanese side. The Japanese attacked us, so all of these American citizens that have Japanese ancestry must all be spies, or we can't take the risk in letting them be free. So they just rounded all of them up, and they put them into these concentration camps. The same exact time that Germany was doing this to the Jews, again under racial discrimination and suspicion. And so this mostly happened in California, Washington, and Oregon, which had a heavy population of American citizens with Japanese ancestry. This applied to any American citizen with as little as 1/16 Japanese ancestry in their blood or in their lineage or whatever. And they locked them up from the beginning of 1942 to 1945. And it kind of boggled my mind when I first learned about this, because we all know how horrible the Holocaust was. And it's hard to imagine that a country and a person, even a horrible person, would do this to people. It is sickening in your mind, just to it's impossible to even get in that mindset, that frame of mind. How an entire nation could do this to an entire population of people, millions of people. And it's just sick. Everyone knows about that, and I couldn't quite fathom and wrap my head around how evil, the Nazi regime was, especially related to the Jewish people. And then to come to find out during the exact same time in history, the exact same period, over the very similar reasons, the United States, my home country, did something fairly similar to what Germany was doing to the Jews to the Japanese American citizens. American citizens, okay? We're not talking about, not that should make a huge amount of difference from a humanitarian standpoint, but American citizens have rights, right? That are guaranteed by the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and the fact that you're an American citizen. So all of a sudden, one stroke of the pen from FDR just nulls hundreds of years of constitutional law and citizenship of Americans, and just locks everybody up in these camps. And these camps were not summer camps, okay? They weren't camps by the lake. They were military installations covered in barbed wire with guard towers out front being guarded by the military 24/7. And just to kind of hit home to how serious this was and how similar this was to the original concentration camps in Nazi Germany for the Jews, you have, during the relocation of the Japanese American citizens, people were killed. Japanese Americans who were citizens of the United States said, no, I have rights as an American citizen. You cannot take me from my home, take my things, and take me God knows where. This is unconstitutional. I have rights. People that resisted were either arrested or shot. There were, what they would do just to kind of keep it under wraps. They didn't want the other American citizens, the American citizens of European descent, to realize what exactly was going on. They would take the Japanese Americans and put them on trains. Again, does that sound familiar or what? They would put them on trains and take them to these military facilities and march them. They because the military facilities and the concentration camps were away from mass transit, but they would take them out to where it was sort of close, and they would march them miles in the middle of the night to get there. There's many stories of terrified Japanese Americans who are, marching in the middle of the night, usually in the Midwest somewhere, or out in the kind of like Arizona, desert region, who are terrified, and they start to run and try to get away, and they're shot and killed. There are other stories of people that actually made it to these concentration camps and, realized what was going on, and then tried to escape and have these plans of escape, and they were shot and killed. This is not a summer camp. This is military rounding up American citizens because of their descent, because of their racial origin, and locking them up in these internment camps, whatever you want to call them, internment camps, concentration camps, temporary relocation camps, relocation centers, there's all these different words, and it's really, really similar to what the Germans were calling this for the Jews. Completely surrounded by barbed wire, completely surrounded by guard towers, military personnel, armed guards walking around. Even as early as 1942, the Japanese that actually made it to the camps and were not killed on the way there, that didn't happen as frequently as it may have happened in Germany, but it sure happened on many occasions. It was 117,000 ended up making it into the internment camps. And they began, especially there was a story of in 1942 at Santa Ana facility. They began rioting because they were locked up in cages and they were terrified as what was going on. And I couldn't even imagine being locked in an internment camp, let alone being of a different race. And having these people, obviously there was a ton of discrimination and mistrust. Kind of evident in the fact that you're being locked up in this concentration camp. And they started trying to break out. And the riot, they ended up killing several of the Japanese Americans in this internment camp. Same thing happened in 1943. Again, most of these are kind of in the Midwest or sort of Pacific West, away from the coast. And I just, in my mind, just reading about and understanding this period in history, I can't help but wonder if one thing had gone a little bit differently, as in the United States is rounding up people. And interestingly enough, it was actually posited that we start doing the same thing to German citizens. So the United States was like on the cusp of being Nazi Germany in World War II. And this is kind of what I mean. I'm gonna take it back just a step. Once you kind of give up the rule of law, okay, the rule of natural rights and human rights, once you give that up, it's a slippery slope. There's not a whole lot of legal and moral difference from discriminating based on somebody looking different because you're afraid. Okay, fear is a huge factor in this. The Germans were afraid of the Jews. Okay, the Americans were afraid of the Japanese and the Germans. So they're just like, okay, we're afraid of everyone. We don't care about their rights, even though they're American citizens. We're gonna do. We're just gonna throw them all in these concentration camps, and we'll deal with it later. And so once you give up the rule of law and respect for human rights and natural rights, the rights that are given to us by our humanity, whether you believe it's by God or whether you believe it's by the nature of us being human, once you just say, okay, that doesn't matter anymore, there's not a lot of lines that you're not going to cross at that point. So the reason why I talked about what the progression was for Germany to start mass exterminating the Jews is because I think it really applies here. It's important to understand that Germany wasn't doing this in 1933. They weren't doing it in 1934, 35. They made it all the way up till 1941 before they started killing them. They were trying to get them out of the country. Again, that's wrong, but that's where it started. It started as you don't own your property, you don't own your life. We can do what we want because that's what we want to do because we're scared of you and we don't want you here. Okay? And it really wasn't until they started losing and they started running out of resources and the borders of the other countries were not accepting refugees anymore that they started to kill them. So, here we are in the U.S. It's 1942. We've got 117,000 Japanese Americans in internment camps. Some of them have already been killed and murdered, in my opinion, for trying to get away, for trying to resist, for trying to fight this obvious abuse of human rights, of American citizens. Again, I don't know how else to emphasize this. And I'm just thinking to myself, what if the war, World War II, started going a little bit differently? What if Hitler and Russia didn't start fighting, right? And Hitler and Russia were still on the same team, and Japan was obviously on their team, and Italy was still on their team, and they started winning Europe. Okay? And then they turn their sights on the U.S. And they start to embargo us. They start to blockade goods. We start to lose. How soon do you think it would be before we not only locked up anyone of foreign descent, but how soon do you think, we would start turning into what ended up, being Germany? We've already locked people that look different than us in internment camps because we're scared. We've already not respected their human rights. We've already not respected their rights as American citizens. As things start to turn the other way, I don't think it's that far of a leap to think that these people that were trained, like as in put on trains and shipped out, had all of their stuff taken from them, shipped to these military facilities, marched for miles in the middle of the night so they didn't know where they were, killed on the way if they tried to resist. How long do you think it would take for the United States government to start exterminating them because they were a draw on their resources? Like once you've gotten rid of all your moral qualms, then everything is a utilitarian argument. Well, they're a draw. On our resources, we're having logistical problems. We should just kill them and get rid of. We've already locked them up. Might as well kill them. So in my mind, as I'm learning about this episode in history, again, we know what happened in Germany. Very similar things happened in the U.S., and I think it was just like it was luck almost in a way. It was a lot of things went right for the United States and for the Allies in World War II. And at the end of 1945, after the war was over, the United States government decided to release the Japanese internment camp victims. And again, we were that close. And that should have been a warning. That should be taught in all of schools as a blaring red flag, how the land of the free, the home of the brave, could be so terrified that they would sacrifice their own people and basically turn into the thing that they hate and that they were fighting because they were scared. And they immediately just turned on each other, as in we turned on people that were American citizens but, were of Japanese descent. So I just wanted to talk about this particular episode because I think it kind of serves as a warning. It serves as kind of a wake-up call because a lot of people are of the opinion, they operate under the fallacy in, we're America, rah-rah, bad things don't happen here. Anything we do is moral and good. And, there's no way that could happen here. We look at Germany with disdain. It's like, how could you round up your own people based on race and fear and get rid of them and exterminate them, right? And we forget that the exact same time we were doing something really freaking close, way too close for my comfort. And so part of some of these episodes that I want to do are going to focus on these really uncomfortable periods in history that kind of serve as a lesson to say, don't get too complacent. Don't get too caught up in the American exceptionalism because we're human beings like everybody else. And we mess up sometimes. We mess up a fair amount of times. But it's important that we learn from those mistakes so they don't happen again. Because that was not okay. So it's kind of a short episode, but I think it's an important episode in American history to talk about because it kind of reminds us that we're not perfect, that we're not infallible, and that fear can make us do some pretty horrible things. And fear can put us in a situation where one thing in a chain of events can set off that chain of events and change the course of history. And then guess what? The United States becomes Nazi Germany, as in we were pretty close. Again, if you take away the logistics there and you kind of restrict the food supply and you restrict goods and services and, you're maybe losing the war. Well, guess what? The the least among us is going to be the first to go. And so that, unfortunately, a lot of times in history, that is, an oppressed minority. And, again, this should serve as a warning to us going forward. And I think we've seen that several times in smaller scales in history since then. Like after 9/11, there was a lot of not even just Muslim, but it included Sikh, Hindu people of Indian descent, people from the Middle East, people from North Africa, anybody that looked a little different, everyone was really suspicious of. Thank God we didn't do the internment camp thing again. I think maybe it's because at least some people knew that wouldn't fly, especially with the age of social media and technology and how fast information gets out there, that probably wouldn't fly. But, again, that would have been another circumstance where those types of things happen. So, yeah, hopefully we learned our lesson there. And if you didn't know about this, I'm glad to, share it with you. And I hope it's a little bit of a food for thought, and it kind of breaks the myth of American exceptionalism, and maybe gives us a little bit of something to think about going forward. So, all right, that's all I've got for you guys. Thanks for joining. Have a fantastic week. I should be putting up some more content here in the next couple days. I did confirm a guest. We are going to be doing, in the next episode is going to be on an economic principle, economic theory. We're going to talk about protectionism, which includes trade, tariffs, quotas, import and export quotas. And basically it's, talking about central planning for the economy in a way to protect certain industries over other industries, and to prop up certain industries in the United States. And it's kind of like the same argument as too big to fail, or, we need certain industries for this or that reason. So we've got a very good guest for that, PhD economist, author of many wonderful articles and works on protectionism and trade. And I think you guys are going to like that episode. So hopefully that will be coming up this upcoming week. And again, if you guys want to support the show, I've been revamping the website a little bit. There is a support the show page where we'll have links to any kind of affiliate marketing stuff going on. I linked all of the social media I've got. So if you guys have Twitter, it's the Take On Everyone, the number one, the Take On Everyone. And takeoneverything.com is the website. YouTube, you can find the YouTube channel as the Take On Everything. And I've also labeled each of the episodes. You can just type in the Take On Everything, and it should pop up with that. You can follow the channel there. Subscribe, like, comment, do all that. Facebook page is Facebook.com/Take On Everything. You'll see it. Go to the website, thetakeoneverything.com. Follow me, like, subscribe, watch the videos, listen to the audio podcast. It's on Stitcher, Podbean. Go to the website and you'll see all the links. All right, guys, have a great week. Talk to you later.